Hello and welcome to Eric DeWees Drum Talk, episode 3. This episode is going to be about my music journey, give you a little bit of background on my drumming, how I learned how to play the drums, just my experience with music in general, and a little bit about my perspective on music and drumming. First, before we get started and get into that, I just want to first say thank you so much to everybody out there who subscribed to my channel. I just crossed 300 subscribers and it kind of blows my mind. It's really cool. Thank you to everybody who's been, again, so loyal, tuning into a lot of my different drum cover videos, commenting, smashing the like button, sharing, introducing my channel to your viewers on your channels, or sharing through social media. It means a lot to me, and again, it gives me the inspiration to go on. It is extremely humbling to me, so thank you. I'll continue to try to get better, make sure that I'm continuing to improve not only my chops and my drumming ability, but making better sounding, better looking videos. I can't do much about the way I look, but I will try to make sure the lighting and the videos themselves look good. So thank you, seriously, thank you, it's huge. And it really is humbling and makes me feel really good, so thanks. So my musical journey, this may ramble a bit. Again, I'm nervous. This isn't super scripted, although I do have a set list of notes. Just to make sure I don't miss any kind of the key milestones, I think, in my learning how to play the drums. So I'll move fairly fast, or try to, but I will likely ramble, and you can just skip ahead, I guess, if you get bored, or just skip this video altogether. So my journey with music, right? My history with music. I think I really owe a lot of my passion for music and playing the drums and songs and specific artists from my father. So my dad, who is no longer with us, was a guitar player, and he was a rhythm guitar player mostly. I think he played Epiphone guitars and hollow body Gibson guitars and Fender Strats from time to time. And he was, born and raised in like the 50s in post-war America. And he was a big Brian Wilson and Beach Boys fan. You might have noticed some of the Beach Boys art I have throughout my place in some of my videos. And when I grew up, he always had music on. I mean, part of his career was in radio. He was a disc jockey in the Midwest. And so music was a big part of his life, and it became a big part of mine from the time I was tiny. I'm going to try to show some photos. I don't know, I'm not really great at weaving photos into video, so I don't know how that's going to work, but I have some photos I found that'll kind of show each of these stages in my journey, and I'll try to share those with you. So I may be kind of transitioning in and out of this boring shot of me sitting here talking to a camera and those photos. But really, I grew up, he was into music. He loved to play music really loud. I loved to sit right up on the speakers and be really close to it. And music was always in our house. And he had a great collection of albums, mostly rock from probably the 60s into the 70s. And he never really got too big into bands like Led Zeppelin or Steely Dan or anything there. He kind of stayed stuck in like 50s and 60s, I guess, and 70s. Beach Boys, Beatles, Creedence, CCR, a variety of music in that kind of genre. Sort of pop rock, radio rock stuff. Not too much on the psychedelic fringe, or what would have been probably characterized as like the hippie sound. He didn't like, he could appreciate, but didn't really like Hendrix and a lot of those artists. And even some of the more esoteric Beach Boys music, like the Pet Sounds album, he didn't really appreciate when he was younger, which makes sense. A lot of people didn't until he was older and got into it a little bit more. But anyway, kind of fast forward. So I think a lot of my origin of music, he had an acoustic guitar that he would play a lot just around, always leaned up against the couch in the living room or in the family room. And he had an electric guitar that from time to time he'd pull out and play and jam on. And so growing up, he was a huge influence on my love of music. Kind of fast forward, I remember, being in, I guess, elementary school, probably 3rd or 4th grade, and they would drag each class out into what was, I think, kind of the cafeteria between the elementary school and the middle school. And I grew up in the Midwest, where all the buildings are connected, not like here in California, where everything's beautiful weather and the buildings are all spread apart and you can walk outside, which is nice. But everything was connected. And so there was this cafeteria with a stage, and they would bring all the classes, the lower level classes out to watch the, I think they were probably like the 6th grade or the 7th grade orchestra band play. And so they'd perform, do their thing, and then they would tell us afterwards, I think it was in 5th grade, like, so we're going to be doing band auditions over the summer, or maybe it was like in the late spring, just before the summer, so that you'd pick an instrument if you wanted to be in band, and then you'd spend the summer kind of practicing, and then as you went into 6th grade, you'd play that instrument. I'm sure this is fairly common. Nonetheless, I knew immediately I wanted to play the drums, and because I guess I was always born with this desire to be a drummer. Again, grew up kind of watching Dennis Wilson in a lot of videos. My dad collected a lot of Beach Boys stuff, and so we had all these VHS tapes of Beach Boys performances. He was really passionate about that band. And you know, Dennis was a left-handed drummer, really a clubber. He just beat the drums really hard. He had a good sense of rhythm as he got, you know, older, but he also, you know, was drinking heavily and doing drugs and whatever else. So I wouldn't necessarily rank Dennis Wilson as a, you know, remarkable drummer, but he was somebody I grew up watching a lot. And so regardless, like, I used to bang on boxes in the basement, and I had a toy drum with Animal on it, a Muppets drum, when I was really little. And I just knew I wanted to play the drums, nothing else. I mean, I just felt the beat. The other thing is, my dad would sit at the kitchen dining room table, or whatever, the kitchen table, and he would hang out there, and if he was listening to the music, he'd be tapping his fingers to it, always. And so I don't know if I picked something up from that and all the music or whatever, but regardless, I just wanted to be a drummer. And it was just sort of inside me. And you know, again, these rehearsals are taking place, and I remember I had to go to one of the elementary schools, and they had the band teachers were there, and they said, okay, you want to play the drums? And like, every kid wants to play the drums, or a lot of them did. And he sat down and he did this very simple tap test, right? He said, so I'm gonna tap, and then I want you to tap the opposite beat of me and stay in tempo with what I'm doing. And so, you know, he's tapping and I'm tapping, and my dad is sitting there kind of watching me. And I did it flawlessly. I missed one beat, and I knew it when I missed it, and I made a face about it or something, but I kept going. And the guy sped up and he slowed down, and we did this tap test thing, this audition, if you will. And he's like, oh yeah, no, you'd be great. And so I was like, awesome, right? So it was a practice pad, some sticks, and you know, sending you off to kind of practice. And I think there probably were some basic rehearsals, but we're talking like marching band, right? So the big stand-up bass drum and standing up, playing the snare and all that kind of stuff, which wasn't really hip, but it was my entree into playing the drums. And I knew that I could move from that into what was the jazz band, and they were cool, right? To me as a kid growing up. I'd watch the junior high or the high school jazz band play, or I'd watch the drummer play school musical performances, and it would just mesmerize me, right? Or if I'd, you know, catch a band on TV or something. Anyway, so I started with that over the summer, 5th, 6th grade, played that. It gave me some basic technique in terms of stick, you know, how to hold the sticks, playing rolls and keeping time, and just some very basic stuff. And maybe a little bit of reading music, but that really, I just didn't want to necessarily learn that. Maybe because I felt sort of the beat and the tempo and the rhythm and the changes and stuff in me. I don't know how to explain it, but I just didn't really want to dwell on reading music. Maybe I was lazy. But nonetheless, getting into 7th grade, my dad and mom surprised me. I came home from school one day, I think, and went downstairs into the basement, and they were setting up this blue sparkle, what the sales guy claimed was an old Ludwig kit. I've got like a photo of it again, I'm gonna try to share. And I was just like, this is fantastic. I've got a drum set. Now it was a snare, one mounted rack tom, a floor tom. It was probably a 10 or a 12 inch mounted rack tom, probably like a 14-inch floor tom. I don't even know the size of the bass. And they threw in some really cheap piced cymbals. I think it was a big ride cymbal, really thick. and a crash cymbal, and then a pair of hi-hats. And the hi-hats were so thin that once I got a little bit older and stronger, I could easily invert the hi-hat cymbals. They were so thin. And so that became a problem. But nonetheless, that was my entree right into, now I've got a kit. And I'm approaching 7th grade, which is when jazz band is. And so I wanted to try out for the jazz band, which I did. I went in, and I think the song they wanted the drummers to play was Hey Jude by the Beatles, right? Pretty basic song. And I remember my dad had the 45 to it, and so we listened to it over and over again. And I kind of just committed the song to memory, and thought I'll go in and play that. And, I think before that, my parents had talked to the band instructors, because I'd had no formal training on a kit and how to play a kit. And all I'd seen is Dennis Wilson, who I think played open because he's left-handed. And I think one of the band instructors said, hey, there's this drummer in the high school who's really good, and he does lessons out of his home for $5 an hour, $10 an hour, something like that. Probably $5 back then. Anyway, and so I went over to his house one Saturday, spent 1 hour with him, and he taught me really basic stuff, right? Just basic, this is how you play. You don't play like this, you play like this. Basic 4 on the floor and 2/4 snare, and really simple hat pattern, maybe some very basic, very simple fills, really basic. It was an hour, and that was it. So that was the extent of any sort of one-on-one teaching or training on the kit that I had. I went in and I auditioned and I played Hey Jude, and I was good enough to be, in the jazz band. I don't know if it was like first, second, third seat. I don't remember how they really did that. But I was in the jazz band. I thought, great. Then that led to early morning rehearsals. For some reason, jazz band rehearsals, I think, were before school started. And they were maybe a couple times a week or something. And I can just remember my dad coming down, banging on the door, waking me up, because, middle school kid just wants to sleep all the time, up late. And anyway, he would drag me to jazz band practice, and I'd be all bleary-eyed and exhausted and tired, but I'd get there and I'd have a good time and I'd play, and I'd practice different beats. And at home on that kit, I would play to all kinds of music, right? Doobie Brothers is another band I really liked. I think they were the first CD I bought, was like a best of the Doobie Brothers or something when I got a CD player. But so music was really my thing. Once I got slightly old enough, I guess probably in middle school, and I was mowing lawns on weekends and saving money up, I was saving money for really 2 things. Music, a stereo. I didn't want a car. I didn't care about it. I could borrow my parents' car eventually when I could drive. But it was really quality speakers, a really quality stereo, lots of CDs and music of all kinds of genres, and drums. And so I eventually upgraded that 4-piece Sparkle kit into a Yamaha drum set, a Yamaha Tour Custom, probably of the 80s. It was used, but it was in really good shape. Barely any dings on any of the shells. It was your standard configuration at the time. I don't remember, I think I kept my existing snare, but it was a 22-14 kick, your 12, 13, 16 configuration. And I got that drum set. I had to put it on a payment plan because I didn't have the money for it or something. And I made the payment. I talked to my dad. He helped, he had to sign up for it, but I had to make the payments through him to Schmidt Music. And I loved that kit, and it sounded fantastic. Birch shells, they might have been a hybrid, but they sounded wonderful. So I got that. I also got eventually some upgraded hats. I think some Sabian rock hats that were really thick, because the last thing I wanted was to invert the hi-hat cymbals anymore, so I went for some really thick ones. They sounded really dark though, and they didn't really cut. They weren't very high-pitched. And then I think I got a Zildjian Crash Ride or something at some point too, in terms of upgrading the cymbals, but I kept the Pice cymbals. I had kind of this hot mess of mix of cymbals. And was in the jazz band, upgraded my drum kit, had that lesson, and was just playing all the time, practicing at home downstairs in the basement, playing stuff, still pretty basic. And then my dad, again, remember he played guitar, so he started putting a band together, and he's like, Eric, you can drum. And I was like, okay. So he found a bass player, this guy named John. I remember he had a really hot older, he had a daughter who was a few years older than me, who I thought was super hot. She was in high school, and I was in junior high. So if you see this video, anyway, hello. But that said, and then this guy, Jim, who was like a neighborhood guy, and my younger brother and my younger sister, they had, you know, Jim and his wife had some kids that were their age or something. So I think my dad knew Jim from like my brother's baseball or soccer games or something like that. So, and he knew that Jim played lead guitar and Jim sang. So we kind of put a band together and called it Still Cruisin', which is kind of fun. Had business cards printed up, and you know, I was probably in 8th and 9th and 10th grade at that point. And we had a set that was probably 4 to 6 hours worth of all the sort of wedding standards or graduation party standards or whatever. All kinds of rock, country, a few polkas, because it was the Midwest and you got to know those things like the beer barrel polka and stuff. And we practiced a ton. We would get together on like a weekend and play for hours, right? And rehearse and just play songs together. And that was great. So I was playing in the jazz band at school. Those practices as you got into high school were during it was like a class, so that was better. So I was playing in jazz at school, and I was watching other drummers and learning from them. I got in a band at church and was playing with some guys there for a little while. I was playing in the band with my dad, and then I got into another band called Blonde Ambition, I think, with a couple really talented guitar players out of high school. This guy named Aaron and this guy named Joe, another guy whose name I'm drawing a blank on at the moment. But anyway, Eric actually was his name. Ironic that I was drawing a blank on it. He played bass and sang. So we put this other band together, and we were playing originals. We didn't really play cover songs, and we had a lot of fun. We actually set up a fundraiser for the band program at our school, hosted that in the large auditorium. Fully, we, you know, went and got like a PA system that we rented, and you know, there were lights and smoke, and we had a band play before us. It was a lot of fun. So all throughout high school, I was playing. And then I moved to college, and I moved to California, and I couldn't bring my drums with me because I was in a tiny dorm room I was sharing with somebody. And I always thought, well, I'll come back to it, or when I'm there, maybe I'll play. And I went to a school that had a band program and was known for a couple of jazz artists that came out of the school. But I realized when I got there and started talking to some people that you really needed to be able to read music to play in that band. And that was just not what I was going to do. And so I didn't have a space to continue to jam and practice or get together with other guys and just play. I had no space to store drums because they take up an enormous amount of space. And so I just kind of quit playing. And so I put the whole thing on hold basically from when I went to school. Fast forward, you know, until I got another kit in like 2016 or 2017, probably one of the two. I started making videos right about that time. So if you flip back to my earliest video, that's pretty soon after I got that kit. But in between, I'll say that I picked up a piano in about 2008. Because inside I was just craving music, and it was an outlet for me where I could go and explore feelings and stories and songs, right? And piano is really a rhythm instrument anyway, at least that's sort of how I view it. It can be. And so my dad was also trying to pick up the piano. So I went home one time and we stayed up late into the night talking music, and he showed me chords, C, D, E, F, right? He just sat there and showed me chords. And then he explained to me, if you want to make a minor, right, you just moving this finger and playing this note instead. And if you want to, you know, add a seventh, it does this, right? So he told me that. He showed me over the course of, I don't know, a couple hours when I was just sitting there kind of learning from him, and he was still learning. I remember laying down that night after he showed me that, and I committed it to memory. I just sat there in my mind thinking about the notes and the progressions and how they go, because as I went home at the time, there was a baby grand piano in my house. And so I went home and started playing and messing around on that thing. And I had some time, given the job I was in at the time, and I just taught myself how to play piano. I think the first song I tried to learn, which will tell you something, was Surf's Up by Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. So it's a 70s track. Kind of has this eerie, dark, melancholy sound to it that I really love. And it's pretty complex chord progressions, and I'm sure I wasn't playing them the way that Brian did. That would have been easier with like inversions and stuff. But that's what I started with, and it's very slow and basic, so from a rhythm standpoint, it was kind of easy to figure out. But regardless, I started recording myself learning the piano, and then I would listen to it and get, you know, work on my playing and try to get a little bit better. But it enabled me to deconstruct songs, and I started reading books on music theory, and got some books on how to play the piano and just some basics and songwriting. And so I studied a lot of that while I didn't have any drums. So that's like 2008, 2009, that period, maybe 2006 and 7. I don't even really know, honestly, but somewhere in there. And then you sort of jump forward, and I got a digital piano before I got a drum set a few years ago, because it didn't take up as much room. I could wear headphones and play it. It wasn't as intrusive on people. And then eventually just bit the bullet and said, I need to get drums. And did that, right? And so I got this kit, and then I gradually added some cymbals to it, and gradually added some additional drums to it, and changed the throne and a few other things that I was doing. And then eventually got mics and learned how to mic, and got the audio interface and everything that's in the rack that I talked about in episode 2. Got a computer focused on it and all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of my journey in terms of what I've learned, how I guess learned to play the drums and to do what I'm doing here. But I think I'll just, and I know I've rambled for a long time, and maybe you guys don't even really care about all that stuff, but when I think about music and I think about drums, so drums were always meant, obviously, to keep time, and to help, in my mind, to help express the emotion or the feeling, help convey the spirit, the soul of the song, right? And to me, music is very spiritual. Songs in general are stories and convey emotion generally, right? At least inside of me. And so when I play a song, I really try to get inside that. And it's a combination of listening to the lyrics and supporting the lyrical story of the song, right? What's being shared and told. Is it angry? Is it sad? Is it happy? Is it funky? And songs themselves have sort of a flow to them. And so for me, it's really about getting inside that flow, and being one with it, and to the best that I can. And I've always had this ability to sort of two things, right? To memorize things pretty quickly. And I think that's really important as a drummer, because you've got to memorize some of the basic structure of a song. And especially for a guy who doesn't read music, right? And I kind of could read. I had to read a little bit in jazz, and I'd be like, okay, so that's the basic pattern, and then I have an opportunity for a fill here. And you can hear it, right? All of us can hear it. I'd like to think that as the song is progressing, you can tell when it's going from a verse into a chorus or to the bridge, and where those breaks are, and where to add accent notes or backbeats or ghost notes. All of that stuff those are all just like tools in the kit, in my mind, to help amplify really the spirit of the song. And end of day, I want people to feel what I feel when I'm playing. I want people to feel that emotion of the song. And it's a careful balance, because where I sit, it's important to carry the beat, right? To make sure people feel that structure. And sometimes some songs, right, the structure with the guitars or the bass are going all over the place, or the piano. And that foundation of drums needs to be the anchor that people are hanging on to while those other parts are sort of moving around. But for me, I just listen to the song, and I try to absorb the spirit or the feel that the songwriter was trying to convey when they wrote the song, and not. I know sometimes maybe some people might perceive my style as overplaying a little bit, but it's really meant to be accentuating or highlighting certain things. If I play a song, any song, and I think this is probably true of most drummers, I don't play it exactly the same every time. I just don't. I don't rehearse songs week after week after week. I'm not on tour or something where I would regularly play something. I don't have a singer and a band expecting the exact same fill and pattern every single time. And so for me, it's just a matter of playing it a few times and then getting it to where I feel like, yeah, that felt really good. And it's not going to be perfect, or I can look at any one of my videos and point things out to you where I would have done this differently, or I was a little bit late there, or gosh, that fill was a joke. And sometimes you might see it. I'll look at the camera and make kind of a face, and that's because I'm acknowledging, yeah, you screwed that up, you know, Eric. You could have done a better job there. It's just like when I was doing that tap test. I hear it, I know it, and that's okay. Nothing, you know, it's all right. I'm not recording an album. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I think that's the other thing I guess I'll just leave this episode on, because I know I've talked for a really long time. This doesn't tell me exactly how long, but I'm sorry I've rambled. Is that I think click tracks and the sort of computers and digital timekeeping, where everything can be in lockstep perfection, has been detrimental to music on the whole, from where I sit, because it loses the soul or the spirit in some ways. And tempos and feel, I guess, can ebb and flow, and you can pull a little bit forward in a beat, and then sometimes you can sort of slow down and get a little bit behind the beat, and when you do that, the song sounds incredibly different. So I'm not a huge fan of these click track perfect or digital drums. I can't stand digital drums generally, and I don't really usually play with a click, just for folks. You know, there are a few covers that I've played that had a click embedded in them that I couldn't get around, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll play with that. But I don't play with a click. Maybe I should. Some people probably will tell me in the comments, hey, you should be playing with a click, it'll make you a better drummer. And I've practiced to clicks before, just playing without music. But anyway, I think that's pretty much everything. Just in terms of my musical taste, I'm all over the map. I really love all kinds of music, all kinds of instruments and instrumentation. And I remember growing up, I grew up on a variety of music. Obviously, I had the foundation of my dad's music and what he was passionate about, right? The Beach Boys and CCR and I don't know, all those bands, Doobie Brothers and a lot of different bands of that era. But then obviously I was growing up, and I remember the first time I heard Appetite for Destruction, and it blew my mind. I remember I was on a traveling basketball league, and I was in a large gymnasium, and we were practicing, warming up before the game, both teams on each side of the court. It was a big, open, roomy place, and they were playing Welcome to the Jungle really loud through the auditorium speakers, and it was just like, that is cool. It was just so cool. But I also remember, you know, some of the early rap I was listening to, and I really liked that, and Aerosmith, and stuff all over the place. Led Zeppelin, and I got into all kinds of music, some of which annoyed my parents, but I think they all kind of bringing this full circle. Both mom and dad were extremely supportive of my desire to play the drums, of me practicing. Fortunately for them, I was sort of a natural, so they didn't have to hear, you know, it didn't sound like a car crash or something every night. But they were extremely supportive. They got me the first kit. They helped finance the second kit. They were cool with me playing my stereo extremely loud all the time. I mean, every now and then they'd come down and say, hey, turn that down. But yeah, I really owe it to my parents, and I think principally to my dad and his passion for music. So I hope you enjoyed this sort of window into my drum journey and into what I think about music in general, and sort of the spirit of the role of a drummer, you know, inside the pocket, inside the song, and sharing the spirit and the soul of that song with other people. So thank you for watching. Thank you for following my channel. You know, stay tuned for another episode where I won't be as talking about myself. We'll talk about some gear and some things I've learned, so that you can pick something up from it. But if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. And again, thank you to everybody who subscribed. I really appreciate it. Stay tuned for another episode. Thanks.